Good morning. Welcome to our Week 4 lecture on Information Management 2. Our topic for this week is all about modeling data in the organization. Documenting rules and policies of the organizations that govern data is exactly what modeling is all about. So the business rules and policies govern creating, updating, and removing data in an information processing and storage system. So for example, every student in our school must have a faculty advisor. Business rules and policies are not universal and it may change over time. The topic objectives for this week. After discussion, you are expected to explain how the business rule on the way the organization perceives and uses its data to conduct its business. Business rules. Business rules, these are derived from the policies, procedures, events, functions, and other objects and state constraint on the organization. It is a statement that defines or constrains some aspect of the business. A business rule is a statement that imposes some of the constraints on a specific aspect of the database, such as the elements within the field specification for a particular field or the characteristics of a given relationships. So for example, a student may register for a section of a subject only if he or she has successfully completed the prerequisites for that subject. So that is an example of a business rule. The basic business rules, the data names and the definitions. So if we say data name, it is about the naming of the entities, the relationships, and attributes in the development of the entity relationship data model. So there are different guidelines that we need to follow. So it must be relate to a business, which is not technical characteristics. So it must be meaningful, unique, readable, composed of the words taken from the approved list. It is repeatable. While the data definition, if you say data definitions, it is a definition that is considered as a type of a business. It is an explanation of a term or a fact. So the data names and definitions in terms of the conceptual data modeling, names and definition must be provided for entity types, the attributes, and the relationships. So the state constraint on the data objects. So these constraints can be captured in a data model such as the entity relationship diagram and associated documentation. What are the paradigms of business rules? Business rules are a core concept in an enterprise because they are the expressions of the business policies and guide individual and aggregate behavior. So, well-structured business rules can be stated in a natural language for end users and in data model for system developers. So, the business rules can be expressed in terms that are familiar to the end users. So, the users can define and maintain their own rules. So the business rules are highly maintainable. So meaning we have rules that are stored in a central repository and each rule is expressed only once and then shared throughout the organization. Last is we have to enforce or the enforcement of the business rules that can be automated through the use of the software that can interpret the rules and enforce them using the integrity mechanisms of the database management systems. Good business rules. A database analyst facilitates the surfing of the rules and the transformations of ill-stated rules into one that satisfy the desired characteristics. So one of them is declarative. If we say declarative, this is a business rule if the statement of the policy is not how policy is enforced or conducted. So the rule does not describe a process or implementation, but rather describe the process that validates. Next is precise. With a related organization, the rule must have only one interpretation among all the interested people, and its meaning must be clear. Atomic. A business marks one statement, not several statements. No part of the rule can stand on its own as a rule. Consistent. A business rule must be internally consistent, not certainly a conflicting statement, and must be consistent with the other rules. Expressible. A business rule must be able to be stated in a natural language, but it will be stated in a structural and natural language so that there is no misinterpretation. Distinct. Business rules are not redundant, but a business rule may refer to other rules. Business-oriented. A business rule stated in terms business people can understand, and since it is a statement of a business policy, only business people can modify or invalidate a rule. Thus, a business rule owned by the business. The ER model. ER model was proposed by Peter Chen of the MIT Sloan School of Management in 1976 and has been widely accepted as the graphical approach to a design of a database. So the basic constructions of the ER model is familiar entities, attributes, and relationship, all which are represented by the ERD or the ER diagram. It is a detailed logical representation of the entities, associations, and data elements of the organizations. It is expressed in terms of the entities in the business environment and the relationship among entities and the attributes of both entities and their relationships. So, meaning it describes the data as entities, relationships, and attributes. The ER diagrams. It is a graphical representations of the ER model. So it is a data modeling tool that depicts the associations among the different categories of data with the business or information systems. So it does not imply how the data is implemented, created, modified, used, or deleted. So the following are the types of entities in the database management systems wherein employees is a strong entity here. And the primary key is the employee ID. So the strong entity has a primary key, and weak entities are the dependent on the strong entities. So its existence is not dependent on any other entity. Strong entity is represented by a single rectangle wherein it is one that exists independently of the other entity types. So for example, we have course. The weak entity in the database management system do not have the primary key and are dependent on the parent entity, and it is mainly depends on the other entities. So the weak entity is represented by the double rectangle. It is an entity type whose existence depends on some other entity type. So for example, we have driver's license, which cannot exist unless it has a relating to a person. So if we say entity, this is a person or a place or an object or a concept in a user environment about which organization wishes to maintain data. So for example, we have the entities like persons, places, object, event, and the concepts. So for person, for example, we have the employee entity, we have the student entity, and the patient entity. For the place, we have the store, warehouse, state. And for the object, we have machine, the building, and automobile. For the event, we have the sale, registrations, and renewal. For the concept, we have the account, course, and the work center. So entity relationship basic notations. So the derived attributes are the attributes that do not exist in the physical database, but their value are derived from the other attributes which is present in the database. So for example of the derived attributes, we have the average salary in the department, which is not saved directly in the database, but instead it can be derived. So another example is age, which is also a derived attribute. So an attribute class can hold multiple values, which is known as the multi-valued attributes. So it is represented with the double ovals in the ER diagrams. So for example, a person can have can have more than one phone numbers and can have many numbers or email addresses, which is a multi-valued. So here, the attributes, the mobile number and the email ID are multi-valued attributes as they can take more than one values in a given entity. So the ellipse with an underline is what we call the primary key, and those attributes are written in the oval or an ellipse. So the derived attributes are in the oval with the dotted pattern. Continuing our previous example, so we have farmers, which is a strong entity, and the primary key is ID. However, another entity which is dependent is our weak entity. So this is a weak entity since the existence is dependent on the another entity which is farmers. So the farmers has dependents, and the ID is the primary key which is represented with an underline. So the dependent's name or the dep name in the dependent entity is what we call the partial key, which is represented with a dotted underline. So what are the types of attributes? Number one, we have the simple attributes. The simple attributes are those attributes which can be divided further. So, for example, we have the class and the student ID. Next, we have the composite. So if we say composite attribute, these are the attributes which are composed of many other simple attributes. So the key that consists of two or more attributes that uniquely identify any record in a given table. So this is what we call the composite key. So examples of these composite attributes includes the name, because name can be divided into last name and the first name. So another example is the address, which further divided into the city, barangay, the province, or the region. And then we have the single valued attributes. If we say single valued attributes, these are the attributes which can take only one value of a given entity from an entity set. So, in an example, we have the gender. So, all attributes are single valued attributes as they can take only one specific value for a given entity. Next is multi-valued attributes. If we say multi-valued attributes, those are the attributes which can take more than one value for a given entity from entity sets. So example, we have cell phone numbers, email address. Another example is an employee which consists of different skills. And then we have the derived attributes, which are those attributes that can be derived from the other attributes. So, not like what I said earlier, so we have the average salary. We can also have the age as the derived attributes. So, the key attributes, these are the attributes which can identify an entity uniquely in an entity set. So, number one, we have the primary key. So, again, as what we have learned on our previous subject, which is the information management 1, the primary key is a candidate key that has been selected as the identifier for an entity type. So, meaning this uniquely identifies the records in a given table. So the primary key values may not be null. So it also called as the identifier. Example, we have the employee number. And then we have the super key. The super key is a set of one or more attributes wherein the values are uniquely determines each entity. Next, we have the candidate key. It is an attribute or a combination of attributes that uniquely identifies each instances of an entity set. So, some entities may have more than one candidate keys. So, if there is more one candidate key, the designer must choose the candidate keys as the primary keys. So, for example, we have employee table. So, we have the EMPNO or the employee ID, the SSS number, and the T number as our candidate keys. So this also considered as the keys that uniquely identifies the records in the given table. So we have the degree of relationships. So number one, we have the unary relationship. This is also called as the recursive relationships. So in this example, we have person which is married to a one person only. So that's an example of the unary relationship. Binary relationships. It is a relationship between two entities, and it is most common type of relationship encountered in the data model. So for example, a person is assigned to parking place. So that is one-to-one relationship. How about one-to-many relationship? A person has many clothes. Many clothes can be owned by only one person. So that is one-to-many relationships. How about the many-to-many relationship? A student or students can enroll in many courses or subjects, and many courses can be enrolled by many students. So those are examples of the binary relationships. How about the ternary relationships? It is a simultaneously relationships among the three entities. For example, a vendor part in the warehouse, which has the relationship of a supply schedule. So to summarize our lecture for this day, we have the business rules, which have good business rules consists of the different characteristics such as declarative, precise, atomic, consistent, expressible, distinct, and business-oriented. For attributes, we have the simple attributes, the composite, the single-valued, the multi-valued, the derived, and the key attributes, wherein it is subdivided into a primary key, the super key, and the candidate key. We also have the degree of relationships, which consists of the unary relationship, the binary relationships, and the ternary relationships. Okay, class, these are the references that you may use for further readings and studies. So just go on with those links. Thank you and good day.